In a few interviews, when asked about which songs he's the proudest of having written, there's at least one that Robert Smith consistently refers to, an echo of a life's past whose stains still remain through time's erosion, Faith's title track. Behind the most melancholic of bass lines, minimal but effective guitars and drums, as well as punctual shots of reverse reverb in his voice, in Faith, Smith examines his own tribulations dealing with the sublime, as he was raised in a Catholic family but later came to reject its dogmas. Although The Cure's frontman is an avowed atheist, the song in question being undeniably colored by that perspective, when one lets itself be immersed in its overcast tones and subdued performance, it becomes hard to believe Faith is a celebration of faithlessness. As Robert himself has stated in his appearance in French TV talk show Tout le monde en parle in 2003, without being flippant, I think that I have always found the idea of faith intriguing. I do not have faith in anything except for I can see with my own eyes and lay my fingers on. But I know that some people have a very strong faith and I envy them. In the back of my mind, I would love to have such faith, but then I wonder if they aren't just fooling themselves. If God is in fact dead, it doesn't necessarily mean that humanity can be unshackled from the need of belief systems, whether they're founded in something immanent or transcendent. It's exactly this phantom pain, the leaving of one belief system behind without a roadmap towards a new one, that's so eloquently expressed in Robert Smith's lyrics and vocal performance in Faith. The first verse serves as a sort of reenactment of the slow creep of doubt that preludes atheism as Robert sings. The idea of perfection holds me. Suddenly I see you change. Everything at once the same. The mountain never moves. It's harder to believe in any sort of life-giving superior entity when there is abuse of the unholiest order, as Robert sings, me like a child, Christian in blood, painted like an unknown saint, an abject nod to sexual scandals in the Catholic Church. Your voice is dead and always empty, a sentiment not too different from what Ingmar Bergman wanted to convey in Winterlight.
Gud, varför har du övergivit mig?
And yet, he leaves this mess where no one lifts their hands and no one lifts their eyes, with nothing left but faith. It is possible that one can interpret it in a purely sarcastic way if you take the song's lyrics as an isolated entity. But if you pay attention to the way Robert sings it and to the band's crestfallen musicality, it becomes impossible to believe that there's a single iota of irony in any of its notes. What does he have faith in is uncertain, but the idea that the song's protagonist must find faith in something, no matter how hard it is to have it, is difficult to deny. Having some Catholic friends who are very much into art and philosophical thought that questions the role of faith, and myself being agnostic, something we can all admire about this song is the place of absolute sincerity comes from, to say, I don't agree with these beliefs that have been imposed on me, but I'm yet to find my own, and not being ashamed of it. It is no wonder why Robert prides himself of faith so much. There's an album that could be called the Downward Spiral, or more appropriately, the Fragile of the 1980s, in its incorrigible bleakness portrayed by glacial synths, driving tom-toms and bass lines, and lyrics that delve deeply on the complete enemy that Robert Smith, Lol Fallhurst, and Simon Gallup felt around the time of its recording. It's The Cure's fourth LP. I had two choices at the time, Smith said in another discussion of the album. which were completely giving in, thereby emulating Joy Division's Ian Curtis, or making a record of it and getting it out of me. I'm glad I chose to make the record. It would have been very easy just to curl up and disappear. Amidst the brink of collapse situation the band's members found themselves in, touring restlessly whilst poorly aided by binge drinking and LSD consumption, they found the strength to put over loathing, self and mutual, in what could be easily crowned the darkest album of the 1980s. As their personal and professional lives came to a near cataclysm, the frontman penned the most surreal of admissions of guilt, the figurehead. Sharp and open, leave me alone, and sleeping less every night, as the days become heavier and weighted, waiting in the cold light. The first half of the first verse is fairly straightforward in describing the descent into living hell the band delved into in the early 80s. In its second half, the song's gothic horror element fully settles in as Robert sings, "A noise, a scream tears my clothes as the figurines tighten with spiders inside them, and dust on the lips of a vision of hell. I laughed in the mirror for the first time in a year." The weight of a double life has its brunt fully felt in other lines such as, "100 other words blind me with your purity, like an old painted doll in the throes of a dance," and "running to the night, I will lose myself tomorrow, crimson pain, my heart explodes," are sung in a weepy voice, a performance that disregards pitch perfection in name of emotional accuracy. The guitars may sound vaguely triumphant in a moment, but they'll twist by way of tritone in major 6 and minor 3rd modulations, painting the overall sound in uncertainty and fear. If Catholicism or any other religion failed to make itself a credible moral guide for Robert Smith, the love he has for his long-life muse, Mary Poole, surely did. With allusions to carnal pleasures akin to aesthetic ones in "I Can Lose Myself in Chinese Art and American Girls," there isn't much room for interpretation about the frontman's repentance. Although they tied the knot in 1988 and remained together ever since, the line, "I touch her eyes, press my stained face, I'll never be clean again," will forever remain as one of the most sobering moments in the band's repertoire. You don't necessarily need to believe in astrology to believe in the idea of a Saturn return. According to Johnny.com, in the simplest terms, a Saturn return is when the planet Saturn returns to the same place it was when you were born. It takes between 27 and 30 years for Saturn to travel through the zodiac, so that means everyone goes through a Saturn return at the end of their 20s, 50s, and 80s. Whenever a planet in the sky returns to where it was when you were born, it asks you to check in with the themes it represents, and requires you to face how you are or aren't showing up in those areas in your life. Since Saturn is the planet of accountability and wake-up calls, its first comeback can feel pretty sobering. It's often after your first Saturn return that you feel like an official grown-up. I don't know how astrologically inclined Roger Waters is, for example. However, he himself admitted that the writing of Pink Floyd's Time came from the realization about what the end of his 20s meant. The year that we made that record was the year that I had a sudden revelation personally, which was that this was it. I had the strangest feeling growing up, and I know a lot of people share this, that childhood and adolescence and one's early adult life are preparing for something that's going to happen later. I suddenly thought at 29, hang on, it's happening. It has been right from the beginning. And there isn't suddenly a line when the training stops and life starts. And the same creeping anxiety came down on Robert Smith's 29th birthday. In April 1988, He celebrated his 29th birthday with the usual gusto, but then hit what he called a bad patch, when he realized that in 12 months he'd be 30. Part of his concern was the simple fact that he felt that The Cure, despite their Platinum Plus success, were yet to deliver a genuine masterwork. As soon as Smith had blown out the 29 candles on his birthday cake, he set out to work writing the most intense thing The Cure has ever done. By combining the somber atmospheres of 17 Seconds, Faith and the fourth album with the pop sensibilities of The Top, The Head on the Door, and Kiss Me, through this integration, Robert effectively delivered on creating the most all-encompassing piece of art he could. First, the urgent post-punk from Three Imaginary Boys in Fascination Street, but here far more muscular and incisive. The romanticism of Just Like Heaven taken to a whole new level in Pictures of You. The funerary tones of Cold refined in its opening track, Plain Song. Every defining emotion of The Cure's previous work finds its most fully realized form in their end-of-decade masterpiece. There is one song where the defining opposites in Smith's lyricism, the hope of romance against the hopelessness of life, find themselves most poetically reconciliated, the same deep water as you. There's an unabashed drama to every single element of the song. It opens and closes its 9 minutes and 22 seconds runtime with sounds of thunder and rain. The reverb on the snare drum is gargantuan. Simon Gallup's 4-string bass chords are rich and atmospheric. The melodies coming from the synthesizer and Robert's Fender Bass 6 are sparse but declaratory. And then comes the frontman's gentle voice and poetry to proclaim, "The shall drown lose less than we." Some have interpreted the lyrics of Sing Deep Water as being Robert's way of admitting he does not have the breadth nor the width of emotion of the woman he loves, but still vowing to try his best at self-abandonment in his relationship with her. I don't doubt his feelings for Mary Poole have influenced the romantic tones of his lyricism, but knowing the personal context in which this integration was conceived, it's completely possible that there are two muses ruling over this song, Mrs. Smith herself and Robert's very own creative ambitions. In a most courteous service he does to both of them through the same deep water as you. If you ever found yourself in awe of Robert Smith's lyricism and thought he should write a book, it may not be so surprising that, in fact, he once tried his hand at children's literature. I was writing novels for my nieces and nephews. Some of them became songs like To Wish Impossible Things, The Last Day of Summer, or Love Song, a novel written for Mary Poole. But at that time, I above all had to prove myself I could be an author. Singing in The Cure wasn't enough. I spent my time comparing my text to my favorite writers' ones. It was quite terrifying. It was reassuring telling myself I didn't write songs, but it's quite frustrating to understand I'll never reach their level. I'll never touch the art of Jorge Luis Borges' words.
No pierdes el negro. Es decir, usted pierde la oscuridad y pierde el rojo también. De modo que yo ahora vivo en el centro de una indefinida neblina luminosa.
Even for someone as skilled with words as Robert, to have measured his own work to something as complex as the Aleph might have been more of a damper than a boom. But either way, abdicating his dream of becoming a literary author must have brought him some level of anxiety, of occasional thoughts of, what if I never write that book plaguing his mind late at night? It was the sweetness of your skin, it was the hope of all we might have been, that filled me with the hope to wish impossible things. Backed by heartstring tugging guitar voicings and violin, it's hard to not interpret To Wish Impossible Things as a sort of funeral speech for The Cure's frontman's literary ambitions. even it was merely for the younger generation of his family, of demanding more he could afford to offer when it could have all been much easier. Since he can't write his Borgesian epic for children, the best he can do is the best he does do, the song. If you're someone who can convey the level of sentimentality and, when needed, horror that Smith does, this is nothing to pity about. One of the most pleasant surprises of this decade was the breaking of the Cure's 16-year studio album hiatus with Songs of a Lost World, a late career opus that sees them coming back to their disintegration and wish sound with greater refinement. Everything you want from a Cure album is here: driving bass lines, drums with huge reverb, atmospheric synths, flanged guitars, and, of course, songs of love and grief. In fact, what is arguably the most grief-stricken of all Robert Smith's tunes, I Can Never Say Goodbye, an elegy to his brother Richard, is featured in its tracklist. And yet, he refused to let the pain of his loss be an all-encompassing burden over the band's song. While writing the song, Smith said he had the input from others about trying to get the tone correct when describing his brother's death. Trying to achieve the right balance between the outpouring I had after the event and just trying to take the right part of that and put it into a song, he said. Some of the versions of that were so overwrought. I thought they were great, then I played them to people and they would say, "That's too much, you can't play that." I realized I couldn't. Doing that song live, sometimes it would really break me up, and it was really difficult not to go over the top. The grace and restraint Robert showed in the final version of I Can Never Say Goodbye is something to behold. The band sets the stage in the first 2.5 minutes as to inform everything the song is about, making only a single verse, a replay of one of the frontman's worst nights of his life, necessary. The rest of his outpouring of emotions is left for his guitar. He may not be an Eddie Hazel weeping the hypothetical death of his mother in Funkadelic's Maggot Brain, but Robert effectively captures the weight of the love he has unspent for his brother with just enough notes. Something wicked this way comes, and come for each and every one of us, and those we hold dear it will. But the Cure's poignancy in reporting the strange, dark beauty of experiencing love as a moral being will remain relevant long after they leave the stage at last.